You can see already started removing the transmission. It is best to do it cautiously. Mind not to damage this part of the transmission, and slowly wiggling it by using the jack so you can sustain it a bit. And like I said, to wiggle it bit by bit, maybe even using a crowbar. But be careful by using this, because you can easily damage these parts of the engine and transmission. So let's continue. This transmission has been finally removed. This is the torque converter. So the filter is behind this cover here. These 12mm screws needs to be removed. But first, let's remove this torque converter. All the screws, the 12mm screws, has been removed. The cover removed. The cover should be removed in this manner. So you use a rubber mallet, and slowly, this is the rubber mallet, not a metal one, and slowly tap it on the corners. Slowly, bit by bit, it will start to get loose, and so in that way you can remove this cover so you can reach the transmission filter. So this is the filter. It's held in by one 10mm screw. After trying to remove this filter here, I see that the oil pump or transmission fluid pump is also in the way. So I needed to remove it. There are 8 12mm bolts. So we need to remove them in order to remove the pump. And after that you can remove this filter. Now we'll be installing the new one. Make sure it's the same. Install back the screw. It should be snugged. And that's it for the new transmission fluid filter. I will be installing back the transmission fluid pump. Okay, my dear friends, for the removal and replacing back of this cover, like I said before, there's a total of 11 12mm bolts outside and 5 12mm bolts inside. Prepare to make a mess, by the way. I must admit, I have cheated. I have used a pneumatic gun or air pressure gun just to speed up the process a little. But you can remove this with common hand tools, a ratchet, extension, and a 12mm socket. If necessary, if the bolts are very tight, you can use the breaker bar. When you place back the bolts, don't screw one of them completely down. Just go one by one and slowly lower the cover until it's flushed with the transmission itself. So when you start here, then you go crisscross pattern, you go here, then again here, then you go back over there, etc. And also in the inside, from the inside. The bolts needs only to be snug. Don't over tight them, because this is aluminum, it can break it. Now I will be removing the old transmission fluid from the torque converter, and I will, before I install the torque converter back into the transmission. After removal of most of the transmission fluid, now let's install back the torque converter into the transmission. Take notice of the sound it should make to make sure that the torque converter is correctly installed in the transmission. Keep turning it until you heard a grinding sound. This is a sound that you should hear. Then you are sure that the torque converter is correctly installed. Now I'm preparing to install back the transmission and start all over again by starting the process of the reverse of what we have done for the removal of the transmission. For ease of operation, I have removed the two headlights and the bumper to create more space, and also I will be removing this fluid washer reservoir over here, so I can have a better place and better movement for the installation of the transmission. As you can see, step by step I'm installing the transmission. It's difficult for me to capture the whole process, but I will show you step by step. I placed it on the jack and slowly I lift it up after wiggling it, playing with it until it's straight with the engine, and then slowly I push it up until it is aligned with the engine, so I can install it step by step. As you can see, the transmission is almost installed. Make sure there are some guide pins here, one here and also on the other side of the transmission or at the engine. Make sure these are aligned, and do not install the screws or the bolts yet until the transmission is completely flushed with the engine. Do not use any bolts to push the transmission towards the engine. Make use of both the jack for the engine and the jack for the transmission to play with them until they are both aligned, and so you can let's say install them both together. The transmission and the engine is now completely flushed, as you can see here. It is sometimes necessary to use a crowbar, place it on beneath the transmission here and push it towards the engine. Now we will be installing all the 16 screws the same way as I have removed them. Alright, the transmission has been installed. Most of the bolts have been installed too. Do not forget to install the ground of the transmission, which is this wire here. And the engine transmission mount, I will leave for this bolt here. I will leave for last when I install the transmission mount upstairs, so I can align it to install the bolt. The next step will be to install this pipe from the turbocharger to the intercooler. Remember to install this connector, the high pressure to the oil cooler from the transmission, and it's held in by a 10mm bolt. And make sure the O-ring is installed and not damaged. Okay, the transmission has been installed. The pipe from the turbocharger to the intercooler, this connection here to the oil cooler of the transmission, And now the next step will be to continue downstairs with the rest of the drive axles and the rest of the suspension. Okay, the next step will be to install the drive axles, the knuckle, which is this one, the brake disc, the caliper, the tie rod, and so we can finish this side of the car. When we are done with this side, which is the passenger side, we will go to the driver side and do the same thing. I will just show some parts of this passenger side, which is the same as the driver side. Let's proceed. The drive axle has been installed. Remember to install the 2 screws for the bearing of this drive axle, which is the passenger side. After installing the knuckle and the shock absorber, now I'm installing the bolt of the knuckle. After that I will be installing the screw of the drive link. For the drive link, make sure also the connector, the bracket of the connector for the ABS is also connected. Don't forget about it. Now we'll be connecting this ABS sensor. Make sure you hear a click to make sure it's connected. This is the bolt of the drive axle. I will do it by hand. I will torque it later with 100 Newton meters. Now the brake disc will be installed. And the caliper. The caliper is held on by 2 50mm bolts. Let's not forget about the tie rod end. Do not install the dust cover yet, since we are needing this crankcase bolt so we can turn the engine. Remember, we need to install still the 6 screws of the torque converter on the backing plate. Both sides underneath the car for the suspension has been installed, also the drive axles. Now we are going back to the engine compartment, and for the next step we will be installing the 6 screws holding the torque converter to the backing plate. Remember to always turn the crankcase bolt so each time, so you can reach each of these screws. Since the torque converter can be turned freely, you need to turn it until it aligns with the hole of the backing plate. The next step will be to install the starter motor and its bracket. After installation of the starter motor and the bracket, I will now proceed with the installation of the crankcase sensor.